Good morning. Welcome to the Stylo News Intel update. I'm your host, and today we're bringing you the Europe Situation Report for August 4th, 2026. In an increasingly complex world, you need clarity, not noise. So today we're going to look directly at the facts, track the primary patterns, and unpack the strategic intelligence currently shaping the European theater. Let's get right to it.
Just a quick note before we dive in. This intelligence briefing is brought to you by ProWave AI. They're the developers behind Stylo Intel Ops that the advanced open-source platform defense professionals rely on, and Stylo News, the commercial version available on the web and mobile to bring you AI-powered news right on demand.
Okay, so what's the big picture right now? Well, across the board, our analysis over the past 2 weeks shows a highly elevated state of hybrid threats along Europe's borders. But here is the crucial takeaway. The data strongly indicates there are 0 verified signs of an imminent conventional armored attack on NATO territory. None. What we're actually tracking is gray zone coercion. It's a calculated effort to test borders and test resilience without ever crossing that line into open warfare.
Moving on to our geographic breakdown, let's look at the northern and Baltic flanks, hybrid warfare, and border hardening.
If you take a look at the geography here, you can see where this friction is really anchoring. Over in the Baltic region to the west, that Kaliningrad border sector, it is highly active right now. And further north, the Finnish-Russian border is seeing regular airspace restrictions and military signaling. You know, these aren't just lines on a map to the people living there. These are very active, very real zones of friction.
So let's break down the actual intelligence assessment for this area. As we said, the risk of a conventional assault is low. The real threat here is asymmetric. We're seeing active vectors like cyber attacks targeting healthcare and finance, recruited sabotage networks, and repeated drone incursions. Poland is currently taking the brunt of this as a primary target, mainly because of its vital role as a logistics hub. It's gotten to the point further north that Finland has actively had to close its airspace and restrict maritime traffic just to manage the risks from uncrewed aerial vehicles.
To really grasp how local decision-makers are viewing this, just listen to Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski. He recently gave a pretty stark assessment, citing a decade-long Russian hybrid campaign against Poland, including cyber attacks, sabotage, arson, rail disruption, and drone incursions. That really hits the nail on the head. Regional leaders don't see these as random, isolated events. They see a sustained, highly calculated campaign of asymmetric pressure.
Now, let's shift over to the Ukraine theater, high-volume strikes and spillover risks.
Looking at the geographic spread of recent mass missile and drone strikes across Ukraine, you can see a massive bombardment footprint. The data shows strikes extending all the way from the eastern front lines, deep into central and western infrastructure hubs, including right into the capital, Kyiv.
When we analyze this theater, we're really looking at 2 clashing realities: diplomatic stagnation versus kinetic escalation. You might have heard public chatter about peace talks or diplomatic engagements. But frankly, there's no evidence on the ground of a mutually acceptable negotiating framework. Instead, the kinetic reality is extreme escalation. Just to put that into perspective, in one single recent wave, intelligence tracked a mass strike package of about 35 missiles and 185 drones, all targeting civilian and energy infrastructure.
So, why does this matter for the broader European theater? It's all about spillover risk. The sheer volume and the physical proximity of these strikes create a very real danger of indirect impact. In fact, recent bombardment waves near the western border actually triggered Polish warning systems and air raid sirens. It's a stark reminder that NATO air defense networks have to stay on high alert, because these localized kinetic actions can very easily threaten alliance territory, even by accident.
Next, we turn to the southern flank, multi-domain threats and migration leverage.
The Mediterranean and North African zones are essentially a massive string of interconnected maritime choke points. These stretch all the way from the Suez axis near the Strait of Gibraltar in the west, across the Med to the Black Sea approaches near Odessa, and right down to the Suez Canal approaches in the east. Maintaining stability in these waters is absolutely crucial for Europe's overall economic security.
Down south, the primary threat patterns are completely intertwined. You've got ongoing Black Sea instability, like recent drone intercepts near Romania, which directly burdens NATO resources. At the same time, the wider Middle East escalation is actively threatening commercial shipping and energy imports going through the Suez. And all of this regional instability, it's pushing elevated migration pressure right towards Spain, Italy, and Greece, utilizing routes from Morocco and Turkey. On top of all that, independent analysts are tracking a persistent background terrorist threat, which has been heightened by social polarization and the recent events we saw in Paris and Berlin. All right, let's pull this all together in our intelligence, synthesis, tactics, sentiment, and forward forecast.
When you synthesize the data, a highly coordinated, gray zone methodology emerges. It's like a giant puzzle, where the adversary's toolkit is carefully aligned against specific targets. They use drones for intimidation and reconnaissance over frontline states like Romania and Poland. Cyber and sabotage efforts are deployed Europe-wide to mess with transport and infrastructure. Out on the water, they threaten subsea cables and grain routes in the Baltic and Black Seas. And finally, migration is actively leveraged in the south to exploit political fractures.
This hard data aligns perfectly with what we're seeing in the open-source intelligence community. When we look at sentiment analysis across social media and independent reporting, there is deep skepticism about any quick diplomatic settlement in Eastern Europe. The broad consensus among analysts is that the preferred approach of adversarial states is exactly what we've just mapped out: gray zone coercion. The goal is simply to stress border management and exploit ambiguity.
Based on these patterns, here is your 72-hour watch list. We advise keeping a close eye on 3 specific things over the next few days. First, look for sustained or increased migration pressure along the Western Mediterranean, specifically around the Ceuta axis. Second, watch for any further airspace probing or drone incidents near the Kaliningrad and Baltic borders. And third, be on the lookout for any subsequent infrastructure intimidation, like cyber disruptions or sabotage, targeting NATO transit hubs and rail corridors.
Which brings us to a fundamental strategic tension. Hybrid warfare deliberately blurs the line between peace and conflict. It constantly forces alliances to adapt. We're looking at a new paradigm, where nations have to effectively defend their borders, their infrastructure, and their institutions against continuous coercion, all without stumbling into an overt conventional war.
For a deeper dive into the events of the past 2 weeks, be sure to listen to the full Stylo News Intel Update audio explainer on your favorite podcast platform and get AI-powered news on demand over at stylonews.com. I want to leave you with this final thought. As hybrid warfare continues to deliberately blur the line between peace and conflict, how will our alliances adapt to defend their borders without crossing the threshold into conventional war? Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good day.